Okay, woodworkers, welcome back into next steps for trimming off the part we care about using our template. And so I took a lot of care to make sure that the edges were the same width, which is going to make this much easier to do. Now at this point I need to hold the template to the board that I care about. And so what I'm going to do for that is flip this over, and there's not a lot of great ways to hold this in except for double stick tape, which is pretty fantastic, and every woodworker should have at least 2 rolls of this stuff floating around. It's just so invaluable when you need the ability to mount or hold 2 pieces together and without interfering with the operation. So, alright, that's my big plug for double stick tape. A lot of woodworkers are tempted to use carpet tape, which you can get at box stores, and it's very, very strong. The problem with it is that it's also really thick. It's this woven pattern, and sometimes because of the thickness, it kind of shifts a little bit. And so just being cautious with this, I prefer the flat stuff, which is easily 3 times the cost, but I could be mistaken. Alright, let me see if this is helpful at all. Okay, good. So using the fence of my router table, that will help to keep these edges aligned. What I also need to be careful to do is extend just a little bit of this material. That looks good. Alright. I'm introducing good pressure where that tape is. Then I'm pretty confident this is not going to go anywhere. At least I hope not. Although it would make for an interesting video. Okay. So now that I'm locked in, I'm using a pattern maker bit, which I've talked about before. Bearing is going to be on the bottom. In this application, that means that my template also needs to go on the bottom. Cutter is elevated, so it's above the thickness of the board that I care about. It's kind of the deal. So I want to set this up so I can go all the way through the end grain, which is the only thing I care about for this operation. And if I've done that, then I have a perfectly mated surface here. And anyway, so let me show you that. And once we've done that, we'll talk about some joinery options. Okay, hopefully that was worth the price of admission. Some burning here. I knew I was going to get a little bit of burning on this section, which would have been the last part of the cut. With that, I didn't want to have much in the way of tear out on this edge. With this operation, there's really no good way to avoid a little bit of that tearing out or spelching. So anyway, so this is a good surface now, and this should work perfectly for mating to that curve that I'm after. A trick that, oops, come back this way. A trick for getting these things off, because it holds like crazy. A lot of people are tempted to, with a chisel or a putty knife or something, get between these and start prying it apart. And you risk damaging the board you care about versus, or your template, or both. But ultimately, if I can get enough leverage on these, and I just shear them apart, and then you're in good shape. The other thing you'll notice is I didn't go crazy with how much of this tape that I used. Early on, I started to use this stuff and really celebrate the fact that it holds, and it holds so well. And anyway, long strip here, with some pressure, it's not impossible to remove, but you do regret life decisions at that point. So anyway, just a couple of areas for what this thing is. Oops, looks like I sprung a leak. Don't bleed on your wood. That's probably the next video I'll make. Okay, so with this, getting the parts that I want to mate to it, my layout lines are still in place. So that is pretty fantastic there. The pencil line is still left. That's the only shadow that you think you're seeing. It's actually a nice tight fit. So questions would be, if I'm going to have joinery in here, let me get rid of this for a second, guys. So if I'm going to have joinery in here, I've got a couple different options. In this context, I can do a floating tenon between these two, and that's okay. I could also create some type of a lap joint coming from one edge, if that's appropriate. Both of those, I should say, would have required all the same steps that I used to get to this point to make sure that this curve matches the shape that I want to marry it to. What I'm going to do is have an integral tenon going into this space. So I need to create a mortise in this location. In so doing, it's not going to be very easy to set this up on a drill press or a mortising machine. It's going to create some challenges for me. So I'm going to go back to a slot cutter, which I've talked about in other videos. But with a slot cutter, I can introduce this three-wing cutter here, going into the router table. Anyway, as this thing rotates, it's going to cut a little slot or groove into this board, and that's how I'll do it. I will have to clean up the ends with a chisel. The thing that I don't have or haven't added yet is the depth of the cut. And I have a set that has 3 different bearings that will mate here. The distance from here to here correlates to the depth of the cut that I want. I want to go a little bit deeper than that, I think, without going through. Unless you wanted to do a through tenon, and then this would be perfect. Yeah, that's the one. Okay. So I'll do that. I'll reassemble all this, change the bearing, or I'm sorry, the cutter on my router table. Once I've got this cut, then I'll be able to cut the tenon into this one, still utilizing my template. So let me do those steps, and then I'll catch up with you again for using that template to make the tenon. See you in a bit.